Seguimos en el evento IoT Regional Forum México y ahora estamos con Ifran Ali. Él es Senior Director IoT Sales de Cisco, quien nos va a platicar de, bueno, ya hizo una conferencia y nos va a platicar otros temas muy interesantes. How are you?
Very good.
How's everything going? Great. We were talking before a lot of very interesting topics. How do you define IoT's transforming business models?
How do you define it?
Yes. How do you think it's transforming?
Oh, I see. I think that the answer is it really depends on which verticals you're talking about that transformation. So we bucket verticals in two different sections. There are the verticals in which the IT department is the technology engine for that particular vertical. It's like healthcare, retail, financial services. So they have already gone, maybe they're 5 to 10 years ahead of the other verticals because they've already leveraged technology in their business practices. But if you look at verticals like manufacturing, transportation, cities, infrastructure, even utilities, there's a whole other group, technology group that does their technology, that runs their substation automation, their SCADA systems, their factory floors. That is not the IT department that runs those. It's a different group. And that group has had their solutions in a kind of sort of in a silo. So they haven't really evolved faster than the others. So now we're seeing huge opportunities in utilities and manufacturing and transportation because now they've come to the realization that they have to evolve. And a lot of the devices that they're connecting or using to make their services enable their services are going to a standard IP type connection. So that means that then IT says, hey, if you're going to plug this in, it automatically sees my network. So now we have to work together. So I think that's how the first step has been through this connection methodology. So we're seeing that there's advances in some verticals like the ones I mentioned, but the other verticals that are the manufacturing, utilities, and transportation are now maybe I would say generously 5 years behind. But
and as a company, they may know that they need to evolve, but how can they do that?
Yeah, you're right. As a company, they are realizing they need to evolve. How they do that is actually depends on a lot of different factors, and the factors are not technology. The factors are company culture, because they're used to doing things in a certain way. The question is, can they actually change? And it really goes from not from the bottom up, but also top leadership down. And the other one, key way they can do it is how quickly they can transition their workforce, their employees, to be able to see the new reality on where they need to create value. And what we found in our company that, even we are in that transition, and we did an evaluation, and our estimate is that in the next 5 years, a third of our employees will make the transition. The other 2/3 probably will not. And it's a tough number, but that is what our assumptions are now.
And why are they not going to do the transition?
For a variety of reasons, right? In some cases, it may be that they do that thing very well, and they feel like they can take that knowledge to another company and do it there because the value of that thing that they did really well has diminished in this company, potentially. That's probably one. The other reason why they may not make the transition is because there is for us, I speak specifically for us, Cisco, we've built our legacy on hardware, selling hardware and hardware components. Our future is in software. So a lot of the transition is how quickly can those folks, those people that realize how can they leverage their existing capabilities into a software context. And some of them will be able to do it, and others will not be able to do it.
And what about, you were talking about the culture transformation between generations. How can they integrate everything, like the new generations with, yes.
Yeah, I think IoT specifically is designed where that migration can happen. Because you cannot go into the future without knowing the past. In most cases in IoT, specifically today, in the next 5 years, because a lot of the systems that are transitioning have a huge legacy of where they came from, right? I mean, if you talk about utilities, utilities have created power plants and they use that to generate power for the cities. Now cities, I shared a stat earlier, more countries are becoming more urbanized. Cities are growing at an alarming rate. How does a utility keep up with that demand? On one hand, they have to operationalize better, so the existing skill set works well for that. But eventually, they have to have intelligent systems that can take alternative source of power like solar and wind to be able to optimize their grid. And the existing Salesforce can do that. But then when you go into services where you're giving that information, your value proposition as a utility to an customer, with smart metering, for example, you can actually write an app that gives your power user in your home to say, oh, you're reaching a maximum capacity. Either you upgrade the contract you have with us, or you have to pay penalties. So you may want to cool down your air conditioning or do other things. Those apps are being written by these utility companies. The traditional folks cannot potentially get to that level of analysis. And then there's analysis on how power grids work. There's data scientists that are being used. And that's a completely new skill set that will have to evolve into that end.
And what are the challenges to get to that point? Because do you think people is afraid of automatization and everything of that?
Yeah, there is. I would say that yes. The answer is there's always a fear of change, generally speaking. I mean, it goes back in history, right? I mean, the buggy guys were scared of the combustion engine, because it would take away the job. And the reality is, as you connect more things and you automate more things, you operationalize to a point where you would need less people to do that particular function. So naturally, there's that fear. But if the question is, how do those folks who are afraid evolve? Where do they find their evolution, right? And how do they manage that? Unfortunately, there's no silver answer, and it probably differs by different verticals. Like different in healthcare, an evolution versus manufacturing.
And what could be an incentive for creating these kind of projects of Internet of the Things for companies and employees?
Well, I think the incentive is that they will be marginalized. And unfortunately, the stats that a lot of research firms are saying now is that in any one vertical, 4 out of the 10 top companies in that vertical, if they don't evolve in their digitization strategy, they will no longer be in the top 10. So it's not an incentive to say, hey, please do this, and let's continue doing what we're doing. It's actually, we have to do this because we're getting competitors from not competitors that we know already in our industry circle, but from the side, like with Uber, with taxi. Taxi companies never saw Uber coming. It came from, that's where industries are, there is this healthy fear to say, how do we continue to develop and create value for our customers so they stay with our services.
In the future, how do you see companies are going to work with Internet of the Things? Maybe 10 years is too much, but maybe in 5 years, is this going to be all integrated?
That's our hope. That's what we're trying to do. But I think 5 years it'll probably take a little bit longer. I think in 5 years, I think most people will be able to say, the things that I can connect, I should connect, and I will connect. 5 years, most of those things potentially can be identified and connected. Because you don't need to connect a chair, you don't connect everything, but the critical asset that you can use to make a decision on, probably in 5 years, all those things will somehow be connected. Now the question is, are they creating value and are they changing business processes on that? That'll probably be a longer evolution.
And speaking about connectivity, someone at our social networks asked us, how do you count the 50 billion devices connected by 2020?
And we agree on the 50 billion as Cisco, but there's numbers across everything, right? The highest number I've seen is 500 billion. The lowest number is around 30 billion. But if I just do the math mentally, and there are 7 billion people in the world. Each person, if they have 3 different devices on them, that's already 21 billion, right? So the rest of them, like ATM, cars, substations, smart meters, that's what's going to exponentially create these connections. So how do we count? So I mean, our marketing teams and research firms do this, but what they do is what I mentioned before. They look at what are the things that potentially could create information that can be used, you know? And it could be as simple as a moisture sensor in a farm. Should that is connected because we need to know what the moisture level is in the ground so we can save water if it's already moist level to where my crops are growing, I don't need to water it anymore. So that is an asset that could be connected. So that's how they do the evaluation. Is there information that we need that a device that could get us that connection should be connected? They call those dark assets. What dark assets could be brought online? That's the methodology they use. Now, all the different algorithms they use to do that, I'm not sure, but that's at a high level, that's what they use.
And what about all the data that Internet of Things collect? If you say we don't need to to put a sensor in a chair, but maybe someone will do it.
Maybe someone will do it, yes.
But what about the data? How do you manage, as Cisco, the company, how can manage all this information?
I think that's one of the most important questions. Is the second most important. The first most important is the security of the data. But how do you manage the data? So I think the notion of taking the data to compute, to analyze the data, is probably changed. So it's no longer taking the data to the compute, it's actually bringing the compute to the data. So we are when a sensor plugs in from an IoT standpoint, that data that sensor is giving you is valuable, probably more valuable at the time you got the data than by the time you get it to your data center and evaluate it. So that we call data in motion. The data that's actively coming from trains, buses, assembly line, it's all data in motion. So you need to act on that locally. Mm-hmm. So you need to manage the data locally with the edge compute type device. So that has logic and intelligence to say, okay, well, I'm noticing that this tank level is too high, I need to shut off that valve. You cannot send that all the way to the cloud, make the decision, then send it back. It's too long. The tank level would have already overflowed. You need to make that local decision. That's why compute has to go to where you need to make decisions. And then application architectures are changing into microservices. So no longer do you have an Uber app sitting not Uber like the car, but a major, big app sitting somewhere making all the decisions. You'll have instances of that app in what they call microservices at different edge compute node levels that eventually, as a collective, they create an outcome. So to your point, how do you manage the data? It has to be in chunks and where you need to make decisions.
And do you think in the future artificial intelligence will be the substitute of Internet of Things? Like we're maybe in the middle of a phase with this IoT and then the next phase will be...
Well, I think that it's a great question because artificial intelligence actually will work hand in hand with Internet of Things. So you'll always have to connect the things and manage things. But the artificial intelligence is that when you have thousands of 50 billion devices connecting, which person is going to manage those connections? It has to be artificial. There's going to be some level of intelligence into algorithms and rules and this self-learning type things where they have to manage that environment. A smart grid that I mentioned before, where you have alternative power coming in. So I mentioned a stat in the morning that said that 90% of all new power generated in 2015 came from alternative sources. That means that the grids in which that power came had getting multiple inputs. So now that grid has to be managed dynamically. There's no one person managing controls to be able to manage that. It has to be a software algorithm. It has to be a software algorithm that self-learns on how to manage that. Mm-hmm. As you bring a new device, it has to relearn how to balance that. So it's going to work hand in hand.
Okay, and what about security? Because that's another topic.
That is the number one topic. In fact, the last meeting in Davos, which is the Economic World Summit, you think they would talk about what's happening in different parts of the world that are impacting economy. They talked about technology. The entire meeting was dedicated to technology and security of that technology. And so because it is so paramount now, because as you connect all these different things together, the possibilities of other people looking at that data or actually changing data in a negative way, it's exponentially higher. Mm-hmm. So we look at our IoT architecture from security architecture at every layer So, what protocols, that moisture sensor I mentioned, the moisture sensor should not only be sending me 2 bytes of information every hour. I should not be seeing a stream of data from them or a megabyte worth of instructions coming from. So we manage the conversation protocol to a level where we manage the conversation. And that's key because in IT, and I'll generalize to make a point. I'll stretch a point to make a point. In IT, if you have a hacker that came into your network, what you do is you shut ports down to cut off the hacker or put them in a quarantine environment. Mm-hmm. If you're doing IoT in a hospital and that pulmonary pump is giving you erroneous signals, you cannot shut that down. That's on life support for somebody. So you have to manage that conversation in a different way. Is the pump going bad, or is somebody actually plugged into the pump to give different devices? So we check that conversation from a security standpoint to do that. And then we have security from a connection standpoint to the edge compute standpoint and to the application layer. So you have to manage it all the way up. That's one of the biggest value proposition that Cisco as a company does, because you can connect things with any device now. But to trust that and to create city policy and policies around that, you have to have you have to trust the security on it.
And just one more question. What would be your advice for the companies and employees to incorporate to the Internet of the Things?
Yeah, so I think that's probably one of the most common questions we get. Okay, so where do I start? And I think that the key would be to really understand where are you today from the way you operate your business. Because the one thing we've learned in the last 3 years we've been in this journey, that IoT is a cool technology. You can always do a proof of concept. Hey, let's connect all these devices together and see what kind of data we get. But it really has to start from a business value proposition standpoint. Why are you doing that? What can you do that will create new value for your customers or for your services or who you're doing it with or for your employees? If you don't have that in mind first, then everything else is a engineering exercise. So I would say understand what value you want to create, understanding your competitive landscape a little bit better, and then maybe thinking where do you want to go as a company, and then the technology will follow.
Okay, well, Irfan, thank you very much for your time. Nosotros seguimos aquí en el evento y regresamos al ratito con más entrevistas.